In this video, we're going to take a look at parenting game objects. Now, parenting is a critical concept to understand because it allows you to move an object in the space of another game object. It also allows you to take one master parent game object and move it around and bring all of the children along with it.
Right. That is one of the functionalities that is really good with it. You can also use it as a means of organization. You don't necessarily have to use it just for being able to move children in relation to their parent. You can use it at the end if you have like all your world objects created. You could create an empty object, name it world, and you could zero it out, its transforms, and parent in all the components and game objects that actually make up your world and have them all sorted out so you can collapse it and minimize the amount of room that is being taken up inside your hierarchy.
That's true. Now, even here, we've got some parenting already going on inside of our hierarchy. We have our camp game object, which has several children. It has 3 separate benches, it has a fire pit, and it has a tent. And the fire pit itself has some children, being the flame particle object, which even that has children. It has a sound effect, it has an inner core, a light source, an outer core, and some smoke. So you can really get an idea of the parenting hierarchy right here in this object, and this isn't even something we would tend to move around in our game. This is something that we would just place once and not worry about. But in terms of moving, if we wanted to look at it that way, it does become a lot easier to move the entire camp around as a whole, since it is all grouped under a single object. And in doing it that way, we don't have to worry about grabbing each individual object and moving it on its own. Now, how do we create these parenting scenarios? Well, there's a couple of different ways to go about it, one of which I use 99% of the time, and the other one is just kind of there in the menu, and maybe occasionally I will use it. But let's take a look at the common way first, and that's right here inside the hierarchy view. Now, I've got this sphere that I was using in a separate example, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and delete that out. And then let's create some new objects. I'll make a cube, which I'll just kind of move up here into the air. And then let's create a sphere, which I'll move off to the side. And then another sphere, which I'll just kind of move over here as well. So now I have these 3 objects just kind of sitting here. I'll get my first-person controller out of the way so that's not confusing at all. We can just kind of forget that that's even there. So we have a cube. We have a sphere, and we have a sphere. Now, what happens if we want to try to move all 3 of these objects together? Well, we'd have to grab each one and try to move them all as a single unit every single time we wanted to move them. And that's no good, especially if we knew that we wanted to treat these all as a single unit at all times. What we can do is parent them together, and if we want to do that right here in the hierarchy view, we can just grab one of the spheres, drag it right on top of the cube, grab the other sphere, drag it on top of the cube as well, and you'll notice that forms a hierarchy. The spheres are now underneath the cube, so if I grab the cube, it's the parent object, the 2 spheres come right along for the ride. Unparenting is just as easy. If we grab these spheres and drag them out, as long as we see the little line here, instead of circling one of the existing objects, a line means we're inserting this into the list outside of a parent. So we can just unparent them like so. So now they're out here kind of back on their own again. We can also grab both of these objects together and drag them both onto the cube at one time. So that's a quick look at parenting here inside the hierarchy view, but that's certainly not the only way that we can parent objects, though granted, this is probably the way I use 90% of the time.
Right, it's the most convenient way. The other way is kind of academic.
It is. It's just kind of here so that you know how to do it. If you use the proper selection order being child... I'm sorry, not child. Start with the parent and then select the child. I'm so used to Maya where it's child first. It's parent first and then child. So grab the cube, then grab one of the spheres. We can go under Game Object and choose Make Parent. And you'll notice that has parented the sphere underneath the cube. So we can do the same thing again. We can grab the cube, grab another one of the spheres, Game Object, Make Parent, and now they're both parented like so. Alternatively, you can grab the child object of any game object, go back under game object, and choose clear parent, and that's the same as unparenting. So if you don't like trying to drag and find that precise little line in between objects, you can just as easily select an object, go under game object, and choose clear parent, and that will take care of that. So that's a quick look at parenting, how it works. Now, before we close off, I guess there's one thing I do want to point out. Take a look at the transforms for our spheres right now. We have an X of 159 and some change, 12 and some change, and Z is 112. And of course we have some different values for our other sphere. But no, let's just take a look at one of them. Let's just pick on the distance, say in x. Now, currently, because our spheres are not parented to anything, these numbers are in relation to the origin of the world, which is actually pretty far away from us. It's 163 meters away. If I was to take this sphere and parent it up to the cube, check out what happens to the position values. They update. Now, why are they updating?
Well, what's happening is when you parent into another object, you are only recording the offset of the child from its parent, not actually its world position.
That's right. And if you want to look at it in a slightly different way, you can say that when an object is not parented to anything, it's actually parented to the world, to the origin, the scene that is actually containing all of our objects. And so all of its transforms will be relative to the center of that world. As soon as we parent it to another object, those transforms are going to update to correspond to its new parent. So now we know that this sphere is only 1.6 units away from our cube in x. One of the ways this can be useful is if you parent one object to another, you can then come up to your transforms, zero out the position, and now the objects are aligned. You've literally moved one right to the same location as the other. Now that's because the pivots of those objects are at their center. For instance, if the pivot of that if that box was off to the side, we'd actually move the sphere to the location of the pivot and not necessarily to the box.
Right. Or if you tried to parent the, say, bench 1 or bench 2 into the cube, which are also have their pivots that are not centered on the object itself.
That's true. Let's take a look at doing that. If we grab bench 3, which is kind of an extra bench anyway, and I parent that down here to this cube, so I'm literally pulling it out of one parenting hierarchy and over to another, and then I grab the transforms for that bench and zero those out. What has happened is the actual pivot of that bench has moved to the center of the cube. Now, currently it doesn't look like that, but remember, our move tool is currently set to center of the object and not to the pivot. If I click over here on pivot, you can see what it is I'm talking about. So, again, that's a really quick look over at parenting. Is there anything else you want to throw out?
Not for this.
All right, well,
good.
This is a really basic concept you need to have mastered. You need to understand how this works, how you can make and break parenting relationships, how useful they can be if you want to treat a collection of objects as if they were a single object, how you can utilize your transforms because they are going to update. There's one thing I will throw out.
I just started thinking about animation.
Animation, yeah, is a little bit interesting if you are creating animation inside of Unity with the animation view. And the way it's interesting, and I'm not actually going to animate something right here. I guess I could. I mean,
well, we also showed it in the animation video.
We did, but since we're here, I mean, if you saw it in the animation video and you want to go ahead and stop, I suppose you can. But I'm going to show you a trick. Here we have our sphere, which is parented. I'm going to delete out that sphere. I'm only going to have the one sphere, which is parented right now to nothing. Take a look at his position settings. They're 159, 12, and 112. I'm going to take just a real quick moment and animate this object. So let's go under Window. Open up animation, and as soon as I click record, we have to save out an animation clip for it. So if you don't know how any of this works, don't worry, it's all covered in the section over the animation window. We'll just call this test anim, like so. Now we're going to drop down a keyframe. Say here.
We got to select Y first.
Yeah, I need to select some sort of transform, don't I?
Yeah.
So we'll grab here. Now let's go forward, say 2 seconds, and all I'm going to do is move this up into the air. So no big deal. Now, if I was to play this, we have some motion. So to keep things interesting, I'll take my playback type and we'll set this to ping pong. Or that's my rap mode, technically. I just kind of called it ping pong type. So now if I hit play, we have a ball that is constantly moving up and down. That is what it does. However, those keyframes were recorded with these positional values, these actual numbers.
Right. Those numbers are relative to the origin of the world.
That's right. And the animation clip doesn't care what they were relative to. All it's doing is writing down numbers. So if we were to take our sphere and parent it to our cube, it looks like nothing happens. But if we hit play and turn to look back at our cube, our sphere seems to have disappeared. However, it hasn't disappeared. Let me go ahead and pause my playback. We're here in the scene view now. I'll grab my sphere and hit the F key, and it has flown way over here.
But if you look at the numbers, it's doing exactly what you told it to do.
That's right, except now instead of doing it relative to the origin, the center of the world, it's doing it relative to the location of its parent, which is this cube. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's something we actually did bring up in the animation videos. If you know you're going to be animating a parented object, make sure it's parented first before you animate it. So that is a quick rundown of parenting with GameObjects, with a few extra things thrown in for good measure. And that'll wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.